I'm of the opinion that CISOs should not be asking CISOs to fill out questionnaires. We were asking our vendors to provide security collateral. Ideal situation, you're working with something like Amazon, Google, there is a trust center and it's fairly robust. On one end of the spectrum, on the other end of the spectrum, auto repair shop.
So you went from weeks to assess a new vendor and a highly manual process to nearly instant assessments, leveraging what was already produced by those vendors, automatically extracting all the relevant controls based on your requirements, almost instantly mapping it to what matters to you, and then only asking those vendors any gaps, any information that you may not have with very targeted, pointed conversations.
So everybody talks about AI now, but if you actually view companies, AI and LLMs are great in synthesizing the context. I think that VISO TRUST does is actually leveraging AI to answer specific set of questions.
Arkadiy, thank you. Thank you for joining us. I'd love to start with just you sharing who you are as the CISO of Branch, and also what does Branch do?
So my name is Arkadiy Goykhberg. I'm CISO/CIO at Branch Financial.
Thank you for joining us. I'd love to start by just asking you, before VISO Trust, how would you approach third-party risk management? What was the challenge associated with it? Can you give us an overview?
Sure. Insurance is a regulated entity. So we have requirements to manage vendor risk, of course. But also as a startup, we're very focused on what we're building. So we leverage a lot of vendors to deliver our services. Especially in the insurance space, when we are working to make our members whole, you deal with all sorts of perils and all sorts of vendors who will work with our members to repair the damage. So it could be smoke damage from fire, it could be auto repair, it could be roof repair from the storm, could be falling tree. So you would imagine there is a large number of old school brick and mortar vendors, as well as a large number of cloud native digital vendors who are part of our policy management platform and underwriting platform and so on and so forth. Working in a startup, had to build it function from scratch. And you always start manual and you always start with the inventory. And then people start complaining this take too long to approve a vendor if you do this manually. So there's of course a backlog of vendors to go through.
How long would it take you?
When I started, because it was all manual, it was probably 2 to 3 weeks, which is still much better than in a typical bank.
We're seeing weeks and months.
Right. There was a backlog, so we kind of started with an intake through a procurement. And then we had to go back through the backlog to kind of figure out what the vendor landscape is, working through finance to understand what we're paying for, and then try to build the context around the vendor. What's the nature of the relationship? What kind of data we're sharing? What services are they providing? How critical they are? What should be the SLA expectation? What should be sort of recovery point expectation? How they're integrated into our systems, and who is even the business owner for this, and who is on the day-to-day sort of custodian, sort of even working on developing what does service ownership entail, and training people how to do it well. So that resulted in typical vendor due diligence, right? And I feel like in our industry, we as CISOs or security professionals make this particular problem worse for ourselves, and it's sort of perpetual and self-inflicted. I'm of the opinion that CISOs should not be asking CISOs to fill out questionnaires. We were asking our vendors to provide security collateral that they have. So we already ask, ideal situation, you're working with something like Amazon, Google, there is a trust center and it's fairly robust and there's a huge number of files available with any certification you can wish for. So that is sort of on one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, auto repair shop. No IT stuff, right? And we need to be able to support both ends of those spectrum.
So that was before VISO.
Right. So we tried a number of vendors before VISO. We tried the questionnaire approach, right, which was kind of standard questionnaire. And we're still quite a bit of effort which was required for the team to review the collateral, review the questionnaires. And I started to figure out, like, how should I scale my team? What would be the fully loaded cost of each assessment? And it sort of didn't make commercial sense given where we are in our journey as a startup. So I started looking into other tech-enabled companies in this space. And I came across VISO Trust as a sort of peer referral. And I think the way VISO Trust approaches this problem space really aligned with my thinking around understanding the vendor context, understanding what artifacts are there, and mapping it to a set of controls. And that mapping to a set of controls, which we were doing manually. So we had like our own reasoning and rationale based on vendor context, what controls would be imported for that specific relationship. And just VISO automated this process.
Yeah.
So it was still, I feel like we would require GRC analysts to process the results, but conversations with the vendors got very pointed. Like, we expect you to have that control. We don't see any evidence of that control. Do you have it? Yes. Great. Please sign here and make sure it's in your next year SOC 2 so we don't have to have that conversation ever again. And I think they appreciated it, that the conversations were like fairly pointed about whatever perceived gaps we had versus what was the reality. And it was very cordial conversation of just two peers trying to work things out.
So you went from weeks to assess a new vendor and a highly manual process down to nearly instant assessments, leveraging what was already produced by those vendors in terms of trust portal documents, and then automatically extracting all the relevant controls based on your requirements and your specific business relationship, and almost instantly mapping it to what matters to you, and then only asking those vendors for any gaps, any information that you may not have, with very targeted, pointed conversations.
That's pretty much it. I think instant is fairly recent offering on VISO Trust.
Correct.
Before that, we were still like manual QA, and there is still for critical vendors that manual QA by a human, an auditor, an experienced auditor, is very useful, like, I think powerful. We, for critical processes, always have human in the loop, like, again, regulated entity.
Makes sense.
The goal is not to completely replace the team, but to provide them significant leverage.
To augment.
Where they are really using their experience and expertise to make risk-based determinations and have a conversation with the business owner or with the vendor and understand the gaps as well as what residual risk is, and what specific scenarios we're worried about, and then have like either a remediation conversation, risk acceptance conversation, or some sort of contractual amendments which will require a vendor to address those gaps or be in the breach of a contract.
Do you leverage the option to do that through the VISO platform, or do you use someone on your own team to audit the assessments?
So we started with leveraging people on the VISO platform and then leveraging our team. And we are now more and more using AI fully enabled assessments and using less and less people on the VISO team, just because we get comfortable with the platform, but the platform got better over time as well.
Nice.
I'd love to understand how it worked for you going from a highly manual process to VISO, to your approach with VISO. How long did it take you? What was your time to value, in a way? And how was that process?
We kind of saw it even during the POC that I was playing tricks with the platform, and because vendors play tricks with us. So instead of providing their SOC 2, they'll provide a Microsoft SOC 2 or a AWS SOC 2, right? And VISO immediately recognized that SOC 2 covers only a portion of controls, and that SOC 2 doesn't really belong to the vendor. And that was like first thing we thought, oh, okay, it's fairly like robust.
It is, yes.
And then it was sort of the challenge was for now is always like getting the collateral. If there is a trust portal, awesome.
Yeah.
But if there is no trust portal, then there is that whole interaction with the vendor,
Yeah.
either to get the collateral, have them complete the questionnaire,
Yeah.
and then getting to the point of the gaps.
Do you use VISO's portal, the collection portal from VISO, to facilitate
We
that?
found that it is not always easy. In the sense, if the vendor trust portal exists, they're not going to use the VISO portal.
Agreed. Yes.
But if they don't have a trust portal, then yes, we use the VISO portal for them to provide the information, the questionnaire, the collateral, and everything else.
So after implementing VISO, what is your time to onboard a vendor now?
So I had to build the process end to end from procurement. So I ended up owning procurement end to end. Because if there is no process in front of it and there is no process behind it, you have a broken system. So I built an orchestration layer which has an intake form, which is internal, for the business owner to complete the intake. And that would include first the financial approval. Because if it's not in the budget and if it's not financial approved, like there is no point of us spending cycles on doing the due diligence.
Yep.
So once it goes through financial approval gate, then we do the VISO TPRM, which includes privacy and AI. And then it goes into like DPA and then legal review. And the orchestration layer stitches together multiple systems from like intake, financial to VISO to Lobio as an example for our legal documentation. So, and we also leverage Slack extensively, so people know where it is at. We can always like use threads and chat about if there is any questions or if it's got stuck somewhere. So it's a key piece of the puzzle in a bigger process. And if there is a collateral readily available, it's fairly easy for somebody to go in, sign an NDA, get the collateral, upload the documentation, then wait a bit, and then come back with a pretty comprehensive summary of what's available, what's not available, what are the gaps, and where to start investigating. When we shared this process with our regulator, they were fairly impressed at the level of sophistication which we were able to demonstrate. Relative to our like size and relative to our sort of longevity on the market, if you will.
Why was the third-party risk management assessment on vendor onboarding process a challenge that was worth solving for the organization? Like, what did that slow onboarding process prevent the business from being able to do?
I mean, as a startup, velocity is important.
Yeah.
Right. So first thing I sort of did, it made a contract with the finance team. Like if they didn't go through the process, the vendor is not going to get paid.
Yeah.
And like it was a very, very good relationship with the finance team, and it was made it very clear to the leadership team and everybody of my peers, like if it's not going through this, like
don't put it on my desk.
No, it's not good. The vendor's not going to get paid. You do you, but like. So, like, it's very important to have financial controls in the back as a backstop for everything. Otherwise, people will try to go around the process. So, as long as people understand that they can't go around the process, then they start flooding the intake, right? And then we basically, like a service organization, as IT enablement to the rest of the business. So, we have to establish, like, what's reasonable SLA.
Right.
So we started within months and people were upset, but they said, we'll do better. And, a month is still reasonable relative to like your other typical enterprise customers. But once we got through majority of the things, if the vendor is responsive, we can do it within a week. And if it's really an urgent thing, we could do it faster. But if we set the expectation saying, give us 2 weeks on average to walk through this, people understand that, okay, if I need to close by this date, then I'll allocate 2 weeks. And vendors are pretty happy if it's done via 2 weeks, especially if they don't have to fill out the questionnaire. So we have positive feedback from the vendors as well as from the vendors from the internal clients, right? If we kind of set up the expectations around how long it take and what's required. So there's quite a bit of training required to say, okay, this is the new process. This is the documentation. This is the intake portal. This is what is expected from you. This is the signing authority. This is the privacy review process. This is the legal review process, and put all the pieces in place. It took a bit of time to make sure it all like kind of operating as a system without dropping balls.
Excellent.
I love it.
We talked quite a bit about third-party risk. I'm curious to understand your approach to continuously monitoring vendors, if this is something that you leverage from VISO, and then also extending into fourth-party risk. What is your take on that?
So I had that conversation as recently as yesterday. Imagine it's like a maturity model around third-party risk. First level, you kind of have an inventory, you have an understanding of the context, and you tier the vendors, right? And then we can talk about the frequency of reassessment. Some companies just assess once, and some companies assess on it, some sort of cadence, whether it's an annual cadence
12
or
months,
renewal.
6 months,
yeah,
was
right.
critical.
Right. Continuous is like fairly high in the maturity. And when you talk about continuous assessments, what do you really mean by that? Right? What specific threat scenarios are you concerned about? Are you concerned about changes in the business relationships? Are you concerned about decay in the posture? Are you concerned about geopolitical events which may have an impact? Are you concerned about like creditworthiness and financial stability of the vendor? Are you concerned about incidents which they may have? So this gets really nuanced and multidimensional. So when people talk about continuous monitoring, I get like, okay, what do you mean by that? And let's talk about specifics. We did discuss getting into continuous monitoring across all of those dimensions and what would it take. And we decided it's probably not the right time yet. Maybe we'll basically almost push it towards the business owners as part of our quarterly check-in process with the vendors. There is an expectation of the business owners to sort of understand what's going on with the vendor with respect to financial viability, the exposure to any geopolitical threats, or breaches and SLAs, or just quality of service that they're providing. So continuous monitoring sometimes includes, scanning of the perimeter or monitoring the news feeds, and we have that, but.
With the risk advisories within
yes,
VISO.
Risk advisories are useful. As far as the fourth party risk, this is also an interesting challenge. I think there is a high concentration in the tech space around key vendors, Amazon, Google, Salesforce, HubSpot, Fivetran. You would imagine like you could pick
we see them in the graph.
You see them,
they're usually core
right.
nodes within the third and fourth party ecosystem.
Exactly. So it's interesting to see if there was like Snowflake was like a typical example, right? So whenever there was a Snowflake breach, we kind of wanted to know if any of our vendors use Snowflake, and it was useful to see. And then we could ask like pointed questions.
Exactly, with the agent.
Right. But this is again proactive versus reactive, right? But this use case which you described was continuous monitoring, but it's reactive versus continuous monitoring, which is proactive, where we had a situation come up where we realized that one of our vendors may have a financial stability, viability concerns, and we had to come up with a contingency if they were to go under. Is that use case that could be covered, right? Again, there could be exposure, like when the war in Ukraine started, we had vendors which had development centers in that region. So how would it impact their ability to support us or their velocity? Same goes for Israel. There are a number of different companies which have development centers there, and that political instability may have an impact. So there is like a lot to consider.
Yeah.
Outside of the digital space.
Absolutely.
I have one or two
Sure.
last questions. how do you look at the future? You're already very mature in that space, and congratulations for the work that you've done with the team. I'm curious to understand, what are you looking at for the next 6, 12, 18 months in that space?
There is probably more to do in continuous monitoring among the dimensions that I mentioned.
That's exactly what we're seeing across the
There
board.
is more to do with respect to understanding the configuration drift internally. So let's assume you start with an API configuration, and that like service account for which you do the configurations has certain permissions. And then those permissions drift and expand. Like, how do you detect that? How do you reevaluate? How often do you do this? Like, so maybe we're comfortable with a subset of those permissions, and then over time, all of a sudden, those permissions increase. And how do you kind of take a handle on this particular expansion of privileges situation? The other one is just sort of understanding you accepted the risk in some unique scenarios, right? And it was well understood. But like in aggregate, now you may have a business unit with a lot of risk acceptance. And that kind of crosses the threshold of comfort.
Yeah.
Where you could have such an aggregation of risk acceptance, which you may, cross the threshold of acceptable risk. So how do you sort of manage that? And then understanding the sort of critical dependencies for key business processes in an event that if this vendor to go down, we kind of have a reportable event. And having tighter monitorings of the specific sort of reliability concerns for this vendor. Because the disaster recovery and testing, it's not always comes across clearly in this collateral. And, if there is like heavy reliance on Amazon US East 1, and if US East 1 goes down, like everybody, like the entire internet goes down. So like sort of understanding of this concentration of risk and concentration of reliance on specific regions, and is there anything could be done about it?
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. Last question. Any recommendations for peer CISOs in that space based on your experience?
Leverage technology, right? Leverage AI. There are different approaches to third-party risk. One approach is just sort of look at the attack surface and make a determination. Another approach is to look at the audited collateral high assurance artifacts, whether it's ISO, SOC 2, or some other framework, which provides a level of validation that is different than just self-representation, right? So like anything related to white paper, anything related to questionnaires, it's almost like assume the high watermark of control performance, but in reality, it's likely different. And SOC 2 provides like rigorous testing. ISO maybe provides less rigorous testing. There is a level of testing which will give high assurance that whatever is being said is actually independent validated, and not once at one point of time, but through the audit cycle. So you could get higher level of confidence that whatever is actually being said is actually being done. I also like some of the GRC automation platforms which publish dashboards and in real time provide control performance. I think this is nascent, and not many organizations are comfortable displaying their posture in like high resolution. And by high resolution, I mean daily or even weekly, right? Because so like everybody understands like the world is not perfect and the controls will fail, and I sort of expect that, and would like to see how quickly the vendor would react to those failures. And if you have a maturity to demonstrate publicly how your control environment operates and provide those dashboards, that provides a lot of confidence, right, to me as a client in purchasing your service. So I would love to see more in the industry people actually showing in a real time how their environment operates, as well as providing the collateral, which we'll go into details of, like, what does the dashboard mean.
Excellent. Arkadiy, thank you. As we close, perhaps just summarize for us in 1 minute the value that you're getting from VISO.
So everybody talks about AI now, but if you actually, few companies do this well, and a few organizations leverage this effectively. I feel AI and LLMs are great in synthesizing the context. So I think that VISO Trust does is actually leveraging AI to answer specific set of questions based on the documentation which is provided. And this is a perfect example of case study of using AI to solve a business process problem.
Arkadiy.
That's
Thank
the
you.
soundbite right there.
Exactly. Thank you for joining
Thank you so much.
Nikki and I in New York City. Really appreciate you.
Glad I was able to help.
Yeah, this was awesome. Thank you.